this topic is being, knowing, and doing, from studying the self to forgetting the self. It's a series of talks, and I always start out by just giving an introduction on why I name it this topic. And the way my background is in immigrants. So as an immigrant, you often have a foot in two worlds. And so, for example, I immigrate from Taiwan to US around, as an adolescent, and as an immigrant, I think we all are. We tend to hold two world views, right? Like when we think of things in English or think of things in Chinese, it could be a little bit different. So people who are bilingual are almost like living in two worlds in some sense. And this kind of mentality often project out to other areas of my life. So for example, as a Buddhist and a psychologist, I would also try to make sense of my professional training in clinical psychology, as well as my deep love in the Buddhist practice, and I want to make sense how these two make sense with each other. And again, the reason why I use this title is because being, knowing, doing came from the movie The Grand Master by Wong Kar-wai, where in the film they say who's the Grand Master? The Grand Master who practice martial arts usually go through 3 stages: seeing yourself, seeing the world, seeing all living beings. And that's in Chinese, and then in English they translate it as being, knowing, and doing. So I thought this is a great quote for ourselves and others in terms of not just practicing martial art, but I think any kind of arts, including spirituality, that there is a process that we go through. So in the Buddhist wisdom, we say this is the Buddhism wisdom is the wisdom of no self, but in order to understand the wisdom of no self, I think one should have a good wisdom of what the self really is. So this is where the topic comes from. And if you look at the Dogen also have a famous quote. And the Dogen's famous quote is, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things of the universe. And to be enlightened by all things of the universe is to cast off the body and mind of the self, as well as those of others. And I think this is in the same spirits of being, knowing, and doing. And so one thing I noticed from my clinical psychology training and Zen training is that there are some similarities between these two traditions. And one of the similarity is the importance of the self. I think from either tradition, if you look at one of the key sources of suffering, the self often plays a role. So I think it's quite important to have a good understanding of the self. So basically, I think this is a part of my 4th, 5th lecture on this. I think I forgot how many I did, but it's all on the same concept. So I'm more focusing on the wisdom of the self instead of the wisdom of no self. I think that's just give you a heads up. So we need to, in order to be nobody, we need to be somebody, as Jack Angler would put it. Okay, and our Sifu also have some similar concept. Sifu talk about the idea of face it, accept it, deal with it, and let it go. And I think that the most important I would say, is the self. So facing oneself, accepting oneself, dealing with oneself, and dissolve in oneself. So that I would say that would be a good sort of, although Zen has no stages, but I think these are sort of good good sort of rule of thumb that allow us to understand the importance of studying the self. And recently, I actually just had a conversation where I actually have a webinar, monthly webinar, and I'm recording one of the webinar, Cafe 229, at the Zhongyan Monastery with BQ Bodhi, and I think some of you may know him. And we were talking about the importance of no self. And BQ Bodhi, interestingly, BQ Bodhi making a strong emphasis on, in order to have insight into no self, in order to have a better understanding of the concept of no self or experiential understanding of no self, one needs to have a good, healthy self. And without a healthy self, the insight and the understanding of no self will be quite incomplete in some way. So again, I think I'm just trying to point out the importance of having a healthy self. And it's important to have healthy self in order to set up the foundation for wisdom, compassion of no self. Any question for me so far? Anyone in the audience, questions before we start? No?
Yeah, if you have any question, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom meeting room. Thank you.
Okay. Well, you're not my college student, so I cannot force you to talk about if you're in my college class, I would start calling names. So that's a little bit different. All right. So let me just quickly review what I talked about earlier in the previous. And so this model of first you become to have a healthy self and to prepare for no self is sort of a developmental model, you would say. So it's important on being somebody before being nobody. And there's some important point about it. So this is just a review what I talked about earlier. And so basically the key point here is that in order to practice meditation or in any tradition of spiritual practice, it is very important to have certain ego capacities to practice in general. So you kind of have to be like healthy enough in some way to practice any spiritual tradition. And because part of the practice is based on the ability to observe our self closely, and that is an ego strength that one need to have in order to sort of have a deeper observation of oneself. And also, in general, there are certain developmental tasks that we all need to go through, like some basic, for example, like basic ability that a healthy person need to have. And we all need to go through that. And so Buddhist practice, no matter how great it is, does not exempt us from normal developmental tasks in terms of human development. So which I will talk a bit more about later, like what does it mean to have a healthy self? And so what happened is if you don't have a healthy self, we are more often likely to misinterpret the Buddhist teaching. sometimes. For example, a healthy person would have a good understanding of who they are. And sometimes people may think that, hey, because the Buddhism talks about no self, then I don't really need to struggle to find out who I am because it's all illusory anyway. So why bother, right? Or sometimes people misinterpret Buddhism as there's no need for desire. So then what happens is you end up using Buddhism as an excuse to let go of any desire or aspiration of living a life, or not even knowing what your needs are, or sometimes even use it to let go of your responsibility. And sometimes we use Buddhist practice to escape relating to other as if, as if that's a good idea. So there are certain basic developmental tasks that doesn't matter you're Buddhist or not Buddhist, we all need to have as a foundation. After all, if you don't have this basic foundation, how are you going to serve others? Since Buddhism talk about compassion and we need to serve others and so having good healthy selves is almost like having a important tool and skillful means. And so there are other I guess potential pitfalls if you don't have a good healthy self, which in that Buddhist teachings can be misapplied in relation to ideas of the self and perfection. So sometimes we have narcissistic need and we often either use the Buddhist practice to fulfill our personal narcissistic need, or we use it to idealize others, which is not healthy. If anything, that may weaken our reality testing. So again, I think the point is if we don't have a healthy self, we are more likely to run into trouble in our path of Zen training. So this is the sort of the basic concept here. And that's why my talk are all focusing on healthy mental state. So it's very important that I think that if you want to study Dharma, you need to have a good understanding of your own personality and how your person and what kind of traits and defenses or ways you cope related to your personality. So I think this is quite important. And when I was having a discussion with Bhikkhu Bodhi, and Bhikkhu Bodhi said, well, Buddhism or Buddhist practice does not just focus on wisdom and no self, but within the Buddhist tradition, there are many practices that actually also help us to develop a healthy sense of self. So that's quite important to know. So within the Buddhist tradition, there are methods and tools that help us to develop both a healthy self as well as help us to reach a wise wisdom of no self. So this is quite important to understand. And also, it's important to know that when the Buddhist tradition talk about no self, we want to make sure we have a good understanding between the differences between psychological self and ontological self. And the idea is that in the Buddhism, the Buddhist practice is not mainly targeting the psychologically differentiated self in terms of the Western tradition that Western psychology is talking about. The psychological self is an autonomous individual where they have a sense of selfhood, differentiated selfhood, with its own nuclear ambition, goals, design, and destiny. I think all Buddhist teachers would have a good, strong sense of what does it mean to be psychologically healthy. So in other words, Buddhist tradition do not deny the regular, normal, healthy psychological self. So that's important, something important to understand. What Buddhism really focusing on is the notion of an ontological self. That there is this. So what is this ontological self? I think we all know that our personality changes, our body changes, our feeling changes, our thinking changes, but somehow we all deeply believe that somewhere within me, there is something that's not changing at all. There's a sense of self where it's always there, it's not changing, it's the core of who we are, and everything else changes around it, but it's a very fundamental belief that we all have. That again, this inherent self nature where it's always there, isolated and not changing, enduring. Okay, so this is the kind of the selfhood that Buddhist tradition would target, because if you truly try to look for it, we can see that it's difficult to find that ontological core. It's like, so Buddhism use a chariot, or we're using a car as an example. There's no carness. There's like no self in a car. So this could apply to anything. So we tend to have sort of a cognitive default to see the world as things. That's sort of our cognitive default. We have the tendency to solidify our experience into things, and as if there's something that lasts forever in those things. So we do the same, including the sense of self. So that is the kind of self that Zen or Buddhist tradition would try to target. Anyway, so these are sort of just a quick review what I talked about earlier in terms of self versus no self, and my talks, the talk on the ontological self and the self on being somebody, and mainly based on Jack Angler's work. So I'm gonna switch gear to what I talked about earlier. So Buddhism do not deny the importance of a healthy self, because a healthy self is the foundation for practice, spiritual practice. So then the question here is then, so what is the healthy self? What is the healthy self? How do we know someone is mentally healthy? So I'm gonna stop here for a second and ask question. How do we know someone is mentally healthy? Anyone want to give a shot?
Maybe let me share my thoughts. This is Anderson.
Hey, Anderson.
Hey, Peter. Dr. Peter Lane, how are you? So for me, I would think like this is probably a little bit judgmental, but I would think like if you can make everyone else around you feeling comfortable and enjoy whatever that's happening, then I would consider like this person has a healthy mind.
Oh, good. Well, no, that's a good criteria, and that's important. And that interestingly, when someone's mentally not so healthy, people around them often kind of affected, right? So yeah, that is a good example of what good mental health looks like. Any other suggestions?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I would say maybe people evidence of mental health would maybe veer towards somebody whose thinking tends to be more towards the rational side, clear, without undistorted thinking, without constantly having like distorted thoughts all the time, whether I'm exaggerating things or, amplifying things. So basically comes down to that, like tends to veer towards the rational perception and not distorting things all the time.
Sure. I think you mentioned a very important point. Healthy person tend to be more on the rational side. The way they think tend to be more rational in nature. By the way, we all distort things more or less, right? But it's more how often we do that and how unrealistic we distort it. But once a while, a little distortion is good, but if we do it all the time, it could be problematic. Just give you an example what distortion sounds like. I remember one time I was hanging out with a Buddhist friend, and the Buddhist friend walked past by a store where there's nice clothing and nice bags. It's quite expensive, and so the Buddhist friend went into the store, look at it, try it out, and start to she knows she shouldn't buy it, but then at the same time she kind of like do a little distortion with herself, and we all do that, by the way. So she would be like, well, I need to buy this piece of clothes to experience what desire feels like so I can study my desire better. How many of you do this kind of stuff? A little rationalization, how you're not supposed to be buying things. You start to come up all a good reason why you need to buy something. So that would be an example of a common distortion people would have. But once in a while it's okay. Any other possible examples? What does a healthy person look like?
Hi, this is Len, and
Sorry, can you speak louder?
Okay, this is Len. I would like to say the sign of mental health, or even to the point of emotional health, is a person always kind of manifest at the peace and internal harmony. And when the person internal harmony and at the peace, and externally that person you can see always kind of smiling in the face, but around that person either she or he kind of always feel positive, always feel delightful to be around. This is, I would like to say that's one of a sign mental health or emotional health.
Good. Often smiling, peaceful, and comfortable to be with, right? Just to give you a little challenge, sometimes there are certain kind of psychological disorder where the person is too happy all the time. Have you heard that before?
No. Okay. I would like to say internal pretending to be happy is different from the point that you have that peace, the deep peace from inside. From that peace from inside would not necessarily to be manifest as a kind of exciting, emotional happy. It's different. I know what you mean. Psychologically, some people, they are happy, doesn't necessarily mean they have inner peace.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, good. So
Also, the inner harmony, and the people, they are happy at the outside doesn't mean they are able to harmonize inside.
mm-hmm. Good.
A lot of time inside of them, in fact, there are a lot of battle going on. They try
Mm-hmm.
to cover their inner battle by pretending to be happy at the outside.
Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, that a good point. Yes. True so good mental health means you're at peace with oneself, and there's the serenity and peace within you. Yes, that's correct. I was thinking more something extreme, sort of like if you're too happy and cannot stop your happiness, we call that manic state, and that is actually quite dangerous. We actually send you to the hospital because you would just be too happy and you have no judgment anymore. So that would be like really bad scenario. So any other want to add? Mental health, good mental health. Let me just ask the question. Do you think good mental health means free? If someone is free from psychological disorders, does that mean they have good mental health? Any idea? If someone is free from
I guess
psychological disorder.
we have to see how one determines free of psychological disorders. Like what's the exact, definition of that from the word saying. But I mean, I'll just say off the top, what pops into my mind is, of course, we're humans in the process working towards, enlightenment. So there has to be a little bit of like, grace, like a little wiggle room, right? For all of us to get a little angry here and there, a little agitated here and there, a little, a wave of despair that comes through us, here and there, right? So we're not, at least, I'm not necessarily saying that we have to function like a robot in complete perfection. Of course, there has to be like some wiggle room in there. But
So good. Let me ask you a different question.
Yeah.
If someone is free from physical disorders, like physiological, how like if your body has no sickness right now, does that mean your body is healthy?
Not necessarily.
Why not?
Because something could be, kind of, hidden. There's it could be a symptom that doesn't manifest as pain.
It could be hidden. It could be something's deteriorating, right?
Right.
And so the idea of mental health probably similar, right? Just because someone is free from, let's say, major depression, anxiety, it does not mean they're totally mentally healthy either, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So I think what I'm gonna focus on today is some of the elements of, or some of the vital signs that what good mental health would look like. So vital signs is sort of just like blood pressure, heart rate. Those are vital signs, and we know like you're healthy if your blood pressure is good, your heart rate is correct, you have normal strength here and there, you eat 3 meals. Like we kind of have some basic idea what a healthy body looks like. So what does a healthy mind looks like? What are the vital signs of good mental health? And so basically what the information is going to be based on Dr. Nancy McGuillan, one of the best psychologists of our time, and she talked about some of the major signs, some of the major vital signs of mental health, and I think it's good for us to check in. So, one of the most, so here are some of the fundamentals of all fundamentals. In general, we know that when people suffer from psychopathology or psychological disorder, they tend to, if you look at their relationship, they tend to lack emotional safety in their relationship. And it's often very common that for people who are in a who suffer from psychological disorder, often they tend to be in a not so safe relationship that be violent, threatening, addictive, or any unhealthy kind of relationship. One way to think about this is, one way to think about our personality or the self is that the self is made up by everything that's not a self, right? So it's like what the Buddhist wisdom would say. And one of the key ingredient of making up the self is our relationship. And so if there's a problem with the self, often you can guess that there's a problem with their relationship. And often, not always, that's why I don't want to say always, but often people who suffer from relationship issue tend to had bad experiences from the past. So they may grow up in a family or with caregivers who often either neglect them or betray them or abuse them consistently. And somehow when they grew up, they tend to re-experience this kind of neglect and betrayal in their own relationship. So people, it's kind of funny, they kind of repeat the same pattern more or less for whatever reason. So a good healthy sign of mental health is that you are in good satisfying relationship in general. So that will be one sign of good mental health. Of course, I'm not saying every relationship has to be good, but in general, especially the important relationship you're in, it tends to be healthy, feeling safe or emotionally safe. And so that's one sign of good mental health. Another key sign, which is related to the first point, then, is that why would some people's relationship are pretty bad compared to others, especially for people who suffer from personality disorder? Their relationship is very rocky, and you know if you are having a relationship with someone who suffers from personality disorder, because the relationship can be very emotional. It's like an emotional coaster, right? When you are within that kind of relationship. And so one of the key important point about healthy self is the ability to see ourselves and other people in an emotionally three-dimensional way. Another way of saying that is the ability to see the complexity of ourselves, as well as seeing the complexity of other people. Because what happened is that when we were less mature, our older way of looking at the world is kind of splitting. We only see two sides of people. It's almost like our more primitive way of seeing the world or seeing other or seeing the self it's either good or bad, and that's it. Just good or just bad. So when you see everyone is just good or bad, it could be quite scary. I mean, for example, if you see people as bad, you could be quite paranoid because you may feel like, people if you carry this kind of idea, hey, people are in general out to get me, right? And then you would feel kind of, the result of that kind of view then is that you are very paranoid and isolated. And because we only see people in black and white terms, then it could be quite rocky, because today you may see your friend as best friend. The flip side of seeing people, the flip side of seeing people as all bad is seeing people as all good, and we idealize people. And so you might end up seeing your friend as the best person in the world, and then they did something wrong, then you end up seeing them as the worst people that you have to deal with. So this ability of seeing ourselves as three-dimensional instead of just black and white is quite important. It's a quite important developmental task that we all need to develop. And people who suffer from this problem the most are really people who suffer from personality disorders. They tend to only see people in two sides. You're either all good or all bad. They see themselves the same. I'm either all good or all bad. No between. Another good sign of mental health is sense of agency or autonomy. And people who sometimes need psychotherapy often lack of it. They are not doing what they really want to do. They tend to give in to what other people choose for them to do. Sometimes they don't even have time to know what they want or choose what they want. Do not have a clear sense of their own need. So this is quite important. Like a healthy person would know would have a much better understanding, and they listen to themselves of their need and what they want. And this is quite important, a quite important ability, because we need to be the master of our own lives. So without autonomy, you don't have freedom. You don't have freedom. And so, and we know that, for example, when people do things that they did not choose to do, they will not be as happy in general. I mean, and we see that sometimes in like parenting, right? Parents tell the kids that they should study XYZ. The kids really didn't want to, but the kids try to follow what the parents said, and sometimes the kids have a difficulty feeling happy, even if they achieve it. I remember one time, you hear a story like, where one kid went to Harvard. Once he graduated from Harvard, he threw the diploma at his parents, like, here, I got what you wanted, So that would be an example of sometime when we're doing too much of what other people want for us, that can create mental conflict. Another sign of good mental health is realistic and reliable self-assessment. I guess a healthy narcissism, like a healthy self-love. And so when you're not realistic, if you're not realistic about your self-assessment, for example, some of us may be very super harsh on ourselves. Some people always beat themselves up because they have like a very super high standard on who they should be. And it's like, imagine you're like, hey, I need to save all sentient beings, and if you didn't help someone today, you beat the hell yourself up for it. And some of us are very good at guilt trip ourselves. And another example is possible. Another way to say unrealistic self-assessment is narcissistic, like blowing up your ego. Hey, I'm the best in the world. Everything I do is the best. And it's the most wonderful, beautiful things I've ever done. So everything that you're about self is like inflated. And we, for some reason, America have so many good examples of narcissistic personality. I don't know if you notice it or not. You could always find them on TV if you want to. Another sign of good mental health is the ability to endure the heat of emotions. And the idea is that all our human emotions have its function. Anger, sadness, anxiety, they all serve their purpose, and they all have their values. So like anger has its value. Anger has its value. Anger is like a tool. If you use it correctly, it can create, so I'm using anger as an example. Anger is sort of like fire, and there's no good or bad about fire. It all depending how you use it. And so in order to use your emotional tool better, you need to have the ability to endure uncomfortable emotions, right? So anger, like fire, if you use it correctly, you could create. If you use it wrongly, you can destroy, right? And anger, I would say, using that as an example, if you're able to endure the heat of emotions, then you maybe have a much better ability to stay in touch with it, to learn about it, and to make good use of it. So anger, for example, if you use it correctly, anger without hatred is compassion. Right? I think Trungpa Rinpoche said that one point. So ability to handle the heat of emotions, anxiety, sadness, anger, and also, which related to that, is the ability to recover from major stress. The idea is, as long as you're a human being, we all gonna run into difficulties in life. We're all gonna run into difficulties in life, and the idea is, when we run into difficulties, we have the ability to keep ourselves together without falling apart. So a good, healthy person has the ability to really recover from the stress, right? Normally, if we face something traumatic, it's okay to feel sad, anxious, hurt, but slowly we all have that resiliency to come back. So a healthy, and by the way, majority of us do have that ability of resiliency. We all have the resiliency to return to normal state, even when we face difficult situation. And in fact, good chunk of us, a healthy person, a good chunk of us, not only can come back, not only we have that intrinsic resiliency of coming back, we also can actually learn something from traumatic events. And in psychology, we call that post-traumatic growth. Post-traumatic growth. So that's another ability. Another healthy ability that a good mental health vital signs is reflection. Reflection means we have the ability to look at ourselves as if from a third person perspective, sort of having a third eye, watching ourselves. People can see themselves reflective. So reflective people are able to see what exactly is the problem, how to deal with it and solve it, and deal with things as effective as possible. You have this participating observation. You're participating in your life, yet you're observing your life. So it's a very quite important skill to have, the ability to observe and reflect oneself. Related to reflection is the ability to mentalize. So mentalization is the ability to understand that other people are separate people. So first, in order to mentalize, it means we have a good boundary. We know where our boundaries, where other people's boundary is, and we have the ability to somewhat understand other people's emotion. So that's an important point, right? If you have a hard time reading other people's emotion, then you often will run into trouble. And so this is similar to, so mentalization and reflection are similar in the sense that mentalization is the ability to sort of understand, knowing what the feeling you have or other people have, knowing how to modulate your own emotion as well as express it. And you also understand what your how your emotion can affect other people's emotions. So mentalization, simply put, is the ability to read other people's emotion better, which means you need to read yourself better. It takes both. A typical example of someone who have problem with mentalization is they probably often feel offended by someone else because they often think that people have something against them. You know, like one guy may get pissed off at a baby who's crying, thinking that the baby is trying to purposely make him angry. I mean, that would be an example of that. And if you're really distorted and out there, for one time I have one patient is taking an elevator, and you know how you take an elevator, you press 1 and then someone press 3, and then you're going downstairs, he pressed 1, someone's going down as well, but someone pressed 3, and he felt that the person purposely did so just to anger him, even though that person have nothing to do with him. So that would be a bad mentalization. Okay. And a healthy person, another sign of a healthy mental state is it's a good balance between what I do for myself and for my environment. So there is an understanding to take care of yourself, take care of your own self-interest, as well as taking into account of the interests of other people who you have a relationship with. I think, to put it in a Buddhist terms, when we say we practice Dharma to deliver all sentient beings, we need to remind ourselves that we are one of the sentient beings. It's not like deliver the sentient beings except me. So that would be dichotomous. That would be a splitting. So a healthy person would take care of self and other, which also means that they have a good understanding of ethical norms and the culture that they are in. Okay. So, and they also have a good value system. Like they know what the culture is about, what is the meaning of living a good life in that culture. So what does it mean to live a meaningful life? So a good, healthy person have a sense of purpose and meaning. And with a good sense of purpose and meaning, a healthy person tend to live with a sense of curiosity, passion, and enthusiasm. So a good mental healthy state means that you're alive. You find passion to live. Life is good, even with its up and downs. You are full of energy, and that's related to purpose and meaning again. So if you live with a life if you don't know too much of your own purpose and meaning, it's harder to generate this fire of living with a sense of vitality. And when you have direction in life, when you have a sense of enthusiasm and passion, you are more likely also cultivate greater acceptance of what we cannot change, what would in our environment, such or within ourselves. There are things within us that cannot change, and there are things outside of us that we cannot change. In other words, there are many things we need to learn to accept, or we need to learn to forgive, or sometimes we learn to cultivate, we learn to have gratitude, of appreciate the limitation of life and ability to experience grief. And I think as Buddhists we all know, the understanding of impermanence is quite important, especially with this ability. And so having good purpose with sense of vitality, which also means we have a variety of skillful means to live a good life, which that would translate ability. So this is ultimately what a good, healthy person should be able to do, right? Ability to love others, to love yourself, ability to work, to contribute to the society in a meaningful way, and an ability to play. Live in a sense that life is a good, life is like a good game that we're playing. And so I would say all these are sort of good signs of what good mental health looks like. And if you want to organize it a little bit, and then I kind of organize it a little bit differently. I would say that in our Buddhist tradition, we have different tools that help us to more or less cultivate these healthy vital signs of good mental health. So insight and wisdom, virtues and ethical behaviors, and mental training can help us to cultivate these good mental health, the good mental health states. So I think I will kind of stop here for questions. And so feel free to ask questions. Any question for me? Jane? Jane, you raise your hand.
Good morning.
Hi.
I have a question about this, the mentalization that you mentioned, and the definition. Yeah, the definition you are given, you provide is that understand others are completely separate individuals. That's the definition you provide. And this seems to me conflict with the Buddhism concept. I saw in the Buddhism concept, we always say that we are all oneness. You are sick if you see others are separate from you. So this seems to me this is a 180 degrees separate. I mean, different concept. If I so I don't know what's your comments on this one. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Let me just give you a different take on it. Usually unhealthy people have a bad boundary with people. Unhealthy people have a bad boundary. In other words, they often mistaken what's, so if I have a bad boundary, often what I would mistaken what's mine as other people's. I would mistaken what's others as mine. So an example of that would be, I have very I'm a very pissed off person. I don't like people, but then the way I would project it out as other people don't like me instead of me. So psychological boundary is the appreciation that we are individuals we are different individuals. Like your feeling is not my feeling and my feeling is not your feeling. That's like a healthy boundary. Now, just to give you another way of talking about oneness and separation, I would say the true teaching of Buddhism is middle path, the middle way. And so the middle way is the ability to see the separateness as well as the interconnectedness. Not in a balanced way, but to see that you don't want to lean either side. You don't want to have a dualistic view. We are all one. If you lean on that side, that's problematic. We are totally separate. If you only see that, that's problematic. And so middle path is the appreciation of ultimate truth and relative truth. So a good Buddhist trainer would have an appreciation of both. And I would say Nagarjuna talk very much about how to have a healthy view of our absolute truth and relative truth. So I would put it that way. Thanks. Hope that answered your question, Jane. Great. Any other question? By the way, I don't want to scare people saying that we all have to. I mean, there's a whole bunch signs here, but it does not mean we have to have every single one of them. I mean, it's like our health go up and down, so is our mental health. But the idea is just to know what good mental health looks like, so we know. I think the important thing is remember the ability to reflect. We can reflect and know where are the areas to work on. So any other question for me regarding a healthy self? No? All right. If not, then I guess it's 12. Could stop here today. So thank you for having me.